The slap cracked across the amphitheater before anyone understood what had happened. Ensign Mason Reyes didn't flinch. He finished tying off the burned dressing on the practice dummy, set the surgical clamp down with his left hand, always his left lately, and slid his right hand casually into his jacket pocket, where nobody could see it shaking. "You broke sequence," Instructor Threll said. Her voice didn't rise. That was the frightening part. "Correct the wound with the certified method, or step aside for someone who can follow instructions. Certified method kills him in 4 minutes," Mason said. "This doesn't." 40 cadets sat frozen. In the second row, Kessa Dorn realized she'd stopped breathing. "You don't get to decide that." "No," Mason agreed. "But somebody has to. And you were busy." It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew it before the sentence finished. He was tired, and tired people said true things at bad times. Threll's 4 eyes went flat. "Report to my office at 1900, Ensign." She turned to the class. "Dismissed. All of you." The cadets filed out fast. Kessa didn't. She hovered near his station, pretending to organize instruments that were already organized. "You could have just done it her way," she said. "I could have. She'd have signed off. Nobody would have died. It's a dummy, Mason. It's a dummy today." He capped the coolant gel and finally looked at her, and Kessa noticed for the first time how gray he looked under the ward's bright lights. "Tomorrow it's you on that table, and I'm not going to be standing there thinking about paperwork while you turn the wrong color." Kessa opened her mouth, then closed it. "That's a horrible thing to say." "Yeah." He almost smiled. "I'm working on it." She helped him pack the kit in silence. And then, because she was 19 and curious and had never learned to leave a thread alone, she asked, "Why do you keep your right hand in your pocket?" His hands went still for exactly 1 second. "Cold station," he said. "Bad circulation. You're from a warm world?" "I'm from a world with weather," he said. "It's an underrated luxury." He shouldered the bag, hummed 2 low notes of something old under his breath. He did that constantly, some tune with no name she'd ever gotten out of him, and paused at the door. "Kessa, Deck 9 auxiliary coupling. There's an amber fault light on the drone panel outside the trauma wing. 3rd one I've seen this week." "So? Report it." "I did. Twice." He shrugged. "Low priority. It's in the queue." At 1900 he stood in Threll's office with his hands behind his back, which was regulation and also convenient. "You embarrassed me," Threll said. "That wasn't the goal." "Then what was?" She rose from her desk, silver-gray skin catching the light, every line of her posture military perfect. 8 months you've been here. 8 months of quiet insubordination, of techniques that appear in no manual, of cadets whispering that the human knows something the Institute doesn't. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Ensign? I imagine you'll tell me. I see a man who has decided the rules are beneath him." She stopped a pace away. "I've buried a cadet, Reyes. 11 years ago. A brilliant boy who improvised because he'd seen someone improvise and survive, and he bled out on my table in 9 minutes while I followed him down every clever step of his reasoning. So when you tell my students the manual is optional, understand precisely what I hear." Mason was quiet for a moment. It was, Threll would think later, the first time she'd seen him look genuinely uncertain about anything. "I'm sorry about your cadet," he said. "I mean that, but the manual didn't kill him. Not knowing what to do next did." He met her eyes. "I'm not teaching them to improvise. I'm teaching them the things I already know work, so they don't have to." "And how do you know they work?" The silence stretched half a second too long. "Because I've used them," Mason said. "File the coupling fault, Instructor. Please. 3rd time I'm asking." He left. Threll stood in her office for a long while, then pulled the maintenance queue up on her console. 41 low-priority thermal advisories, all of them looking identical, all of them almost certainly nothing. Deck 9 sat at position 29. She flagged it for morning review, not tonight because it was 1940 and she was tired and it had been a very long day. She would remember that decision for the rest of her life. In a supply alcove 2 decks down, Mason locked the door, rolled up his sleeve, and pressed a black injector against the inside of his elbow. The hiss was small and ugly. His hand stopped shaking within 8 seconds the way it always did. For the 4 or 5 hours it always lasted. The medical console beside him chirped, reading his biometrics automatically, the way station consoles did for any officer standing too close. Cellular degradation, stage 3. Projected viability, 5 to 7 months. Suppressant dependency confirmed. Recommend immediate. Mason deleted the log the way he had every night for 8 months and went to bed. Kessa found him at 0600 the next morning in the empty trauma ward, running a suture drill on a synthetic limb, alone, badly lit by nothing but the planet rise through the viewport. "You know normal people sleep," she said. "I've heard rumors." She dropped onto the stool beside him and watched his hands. Steady this morning. Perfectly steady. She filed that away next to the pocket and the humming, and the way he never took the stairs 2 at a time like the other officers did. "Threll told the whole faculty you're a discipline problem. Threll's not wrong. You're supposed to be offended." "Waste of energy," Mason said. He nodded at the limb. "Go on. Show me the vascular clamp. And don't do it the way the manual says. Do it the way you do it if the lights were out and someone was screaming." Kessa hesitated, then did it. Her hands were fast, clumsy in the second step, then correct. Mason grunted approval. "Better than yesterday. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get sentimental. I'm grading you in an hour." He straightened, and Kessa caught it. A flicker, quick and involuntary, of his weight shifting like the floor had moved. He steadied himself against the table so smoothly that if she hadn't been watching his hands, she'd have missed it entirely. "Mason, don't." You went white. "Station gravity's calibrated for SARN physiology," he said. "It does that to humans. It's in the orientation packet, page 9. Nobody reads page 9. He picked up the limb and handed it to her. Again, slower on the second step. She did it again. She didn't stop watching him. At 11:30. Threll called him into a corridor consult with 3 other instructors, and to Mason's genuine surprise, put the Deck 9 coupling on the agenda herself. "Ensign Reyes has raised a maintenance concern 3 times, she said crisply. "I'm inclined to escalate it." Instructor Vaughn, who ran logistics and had never once in his life been inclined to escalate anything, sighed. "Thermal variance on an auxiliary line. Threll, we have 40 of those." 41, Mason said. "You've counted." "I read page 9, Mason said. Kessa, passing behind them with a supply tray, made a sound like a strangled laugh and kept walking. Vaughn's secondary eyes narrowed. "Escalation requires a shutdown. Shutdown means canceling the second-year triage exercise, which the board is observing at 1400. Are you proposing I tell the board we canceled their showcase because a class 4 ensign has a feeling?" "I'm proposing you tell them nobody died," Mason said. "It's a shorter conversation." There was a pause. Threll looked, for a moment, like she was going to back him. "File it for 0900 tomorrow," she said instead. "After the exercise. Properly, with an engineering assessment attached, so it can't be dismissed again." It was, Mason thought, the most reasonable possible decision. Reasonable decisions were the ones that killed people. He'd learned that somewhere very far from here, on a planet whose name was still classified, from a squad who'd all made reasonable decisions right up until they didn't have to make any more. "Understood, instructor," he said, and went to lunch and didn't eat it. At 13:58, Mason was in the Deck 11 supply room signing off inventory when his wrist unit chirped. Not an alarm, just a status flicker. Deck 9 environmental pressure, down 0.4%. He was already moving before it became an alarm. Behind him, on the counter, sat his equipment bag with the black injector inside it. He didn't go back for it. There wasn't time, and afterward he would tell people there wasn't time, and only one of those things would be entirely true. The corridor lights dropped to red as he ran. The station's voice came over every speaker at once, flat and unhurried, the way machines always were about the worst moments of your life. "Auxiliary core breach, Deck 9. Radiological and thermal hazard. Blast doors sealing. All personnel evacuate." Mason hit the Deck 9 junction as the doors began grinding closed, and through the shrinking gap he could see it. Pale coolant vapor pouring from a ruptured seam 11 meters up, cadets down on the floor, a support strut collapsed across the corridor, and Threll pinned beneath it, one leg bent wrong, shouting orders at students too disoriented to hear her. 31 cadets. 11 still inside. 6 minutes before SARN physiology stopped being negotiable. The station security officer grabbed his arm. Nobody goes in. Radiation's already past lethal threshold for your species, Mason said and pulled free. The first thing the radiation took was his sense of smell, which was a mercy, because the corridor smelled like cooked coolant and worse things. Mason went to Threll first, not out of rank, but because a crush injury with arterial involvement outranked everything else in the room. He cut the strut free with a hydraulic spreader never designed for a support beam, and it worked because he'd done it before with worse tools. Ensign. Threll's voice was thin. Get the cadets. Leave me. Talking costs you blood pressure, instructor. That's an order. Noted. He packed the wound with something from his belt pouch that was an institute issue, and her legs stopped screaming at her, and she stared at him with all 4 eyes because nothing in SARN medicine did that. Then he was gone, 3 bodies down the corridor, hauling a cadet twice his mass onto his shoulder. Kessa found him at the 4th casualty. She'd come in through the maintenance crawl, mask on, hands shaking so hard she dropped her tray twice getting here. You are insane, she said. Vitals on the one by the wall. Loud voice. Go. She went. She called out numbers she wasn't sure she was reading right, and he corrected her twice without looking, and somewhere around the 6th patient she realized he'd stopped correcting her because she'd stopped being wrong. She also realized his nose was bleeding. Mason. Carry now. Talk later. You're bleeding. Dry air. He lifted the 6th cadet. His right hand, she saw, was shaking so badly he had to hook it under the man's arm instead of gripping. Kessa, look at me. If I go down, you don't stop. You get them to the seal, you don't come back for me. Say it. That's not. Say it. I get them to the seal, she said and hated every word. They worked. The station counted down in its flat voice. Cadet 7 went out at 4 minutes 12. Cadets 8 and 9 at 3 minutes even, hauled together, Mason's boots skidding in coolant slurry. Cadet 10 was the heavy one, the boy from Threll's 2nd row, and Mason got him up in a lift that made something in his back audibly give. At 1 minute 40, only Threll was left, and Mason came back for her. You should have taken the cadet twice, she said, as he got an arm under her. 2 trips. Efficient. Wasn't going to. Why? Because you'd have made them go without you? He said, hauling her upright. And then I'd have had to argue with you about it, and I don't have the time. The seal cracked open at 40 seconds. Rescue crews poured in. Someone took Threll's weight from him, and someone else was shouting about contamination protocols, and Mason, standing in the middle of it with blood on his mouth, finally let his shoulders come down. A rescue medic swept a scanner across him. Routine. 3 seconds. Confirm nothing. The scanner shrieked. Biometric origin classification. Mismatch. Subject physiology consistent with Class 9 environment adaptation. The medic read it out loud without meaning to. The word moved through the corridor like a current Class 9, Death World classification, the number every cadet studied in theory and never expected to meet. Someone laughed, high and relieved. Of course the human had walked through lethal radiation. He wasn't built like them. He was built like something the galaxy had learned to be careful about. Threll saw it differently because Threll was watching his face. She watched the relief spread through the corridor. She watched Mason hear it and understand it and choose not to correct it. Then she watched his knees go. He hit the deck hard, and the scanner in the medic's hand, still running, still cheerfully spitting data, scrolled on to the second half of the readout that nobody had waited to hear. Adaptation markers degenerative. Cellular viability. Stage 4. Suppressant levels. Absent. Projected survival without intervention. 40 minutes. He woke up in his own trauma ward, which struck him as poor planning on someone's part. Threll was in the chair beside the bed, her leg braced, her uniform jacket gone. her eyes fixed on him with an expression he couldn't place because he'd never seen a Sarn look furious and gutted at the same time. 9 months, she said. Morning. 9 months on a Class 9 world. Vasker deep. Your unit's transport went down and you were the only one who walked out, and you did it in 9 months, and the reason your file is sealed is that the Sarn Medical Board classified what that planet did to your cells as a biological hazard. Her voice cracked just once, and she hated it. You are not a Deathworlder, Ensign. You are a man who survived one, and it is killing you. 5 to 7 months, Mason said. For now, probably after yesterday. The suppressants slow it. That's all they do. You have known this the entire time you have been on my station. Yes. And you came here, to teach, to argue with me about coupling faults and manual sequences while your own body. She stopped. Started again. Why? Mason looked at the ceiling for a while. Because I know 41 things that keep people alive that nobody wrote down, he said. I learned every one of them in the worst possible way, from people who aren't around to teach them. And in 4 months I stopped being able to hold a clamp. He turned his head to look at her. You can't take knowledge with you, instructor. You can only hand it to someone with steadier hands. That's the whole job. That's always been the whole job. Threll sat back very slowly. I struck you, she said, in front of 40 cadets. You were dying, and you let me. You were grieving a boy from 11 years ago, Mason said. I wasn't going to take that off you with a diagnosis. That's not fair fighting. Do not be kind to me right now. Wasn't planning on making a habit of it. She laughed. A wet, appalled, entirely undignified sound that she would deny for the rest of her career. Then she leaned forward, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady in a way that meant she'd already decided something. Vasker adaptation is degenerative in a human metabolic frame, she said. It is not degenerative in a Sarn one. We have 400 years of suppressant chemistry that your species has never had access to, because your species filed itself as harmless and nobody thought to share. Her main eyes held his. I cannot cure you, Ensign. Do not look at me like I'm offering that. But I can convene a board, and I can put your name on a treatment protocol, and I can very probably buy you years instead of months. Mason didn't say anything for a long moment. It was, Kessa said afterward, the only time she ever saw him lose the thread of a conversation completely. Why? He managed. Because you brought 11 of my cadets out of a corridor I put them in, Threll said. Because the fault was in my queue at position 29 and I flagged it for morning. She stood, gathering herself, rigid spine sliding back into place like armor. And because you were right, and I intend to spend the next several years being extremely irritated about it. The board convened in 6 days. The protocol passed in 11. The curriculum revision took 4 months, and when it published, the 41 techniques were listed under a chapter heading with his name on it, over his objection, which was noted formally and then ignored. Kessa Dorn signed as first author on the vascular clamp entry because her hands were steadier, and because that had been the whole point from the beginning. Earth's classification never changed. Some truths are more useful held quietly than announced. But 3 years later, when a first-year muttered that humans only got trusted because they were harmless, it was Threll who stopped mid-lecture and turned around. Harmless, she repeated. There is a man on this station who walked into a radiation breach knowing precisely what it would cost him, and came out carrying my students. Her 4 eyes swept the room. Do not confuse fragile with harmless, cadet. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a species that cannot be hurt. It is one that decides the price is acceptable and walks in any way. Mason Reyes is still teaching. His right hand shakes badly now and he does the demonstrations left-handed, narrating each step aloud while Kessa's hands do the work, which, he says, is the way it should have been done from the start. Threll still writes him up for insubordination roughly twice a year, and he still keeps every one of the citations, framed, above his desk.